Here are 3 stories told to me by college students. The counting. This happened to me at the beginning of my freshman year of college. It was right after I moved out of my parents' house. I was one of those kids who couldn't wait to move out, and 18 didn't come soon enough. I got along great with my parents, but I just badly wanted to find a place of my own, with my own rules. I wanted to be free to do anything I wanted to, and since they were still willing to pay for college, it made sense to find a place. I found a nice little 3-bedroom house in Palatine, Illinois, that was being rented by 2 other community college students. They were sophomores at Harper College, the college I would be attending. They were looking for someone to fill in the 3rd room, and since I'd be attending the same college as they were, there was 1 male and 1 female roommate, so adding me in made it like a reverse threes company. Well, my bedroom was at the back of the house, on the bottom floor. My male roommate's room was right beside me, and the female roommate slept upstairs. My roommates kept a much different schedule than I. They were both full-time and worked nearly full-time as well. I didn't have to work as a freshman. My parents were paying for everything, and I had some scholarships and grants that also helped pay for my room. Very often I would have the entire house to myself, and that was just wonderful. Although I didn't spend much time out in the common area of the house, preferring to keep to my own room, it was still nice to have a nice and quiet place that was just mine some of the time. Well, one night, after I had been in the house for nearly a month, I had gotten very used to having the place to myself. It was the middle of September, and I was just trying to settle into my first year of school. My psychology class was having its first test, and I thought I would take advantage of the nice and quiet house to study with. When I got home from class in the late afternoon, to absolutely no surprise, the house was completely empty. Grabbing my laptop, I retreated to my room so I could study for my test in silence. I got so engaged in the subject matter that before I knew it, it was completely dark in the house. I was using a flashcard program on my laptop to study with, so the lights around me were all off. Sitting at my desk, I had only the light of the computer screen illuminating the room. Around 11 p.m., I realized I hadn't eaten yet, so I got up and walked in the kitchen to get myself a food and drink. After grabbing myself a sandwich and a can of cherry Coke, I had turned the kitchen light off and began walking back towards my room. I stopped, though, when I thought I heard something. It sounded like someone was talking. Even though it was dark in the room, I stopped and tried to listen. After a moment or two, I didn't hear anything else, so I figured it must have been my imagination. Once I got back to my room, I sat down at my desk and went back to my studying. I kept the lights out because it was easier to focus on the computer screen that way. After about 30 minutes, I thought I heard something again. I cocked my head and tried to listen, wondering what could be getting my attention. I almost called out to see if one of my roommates had returned home, but I knew that couldn't be the case. I would have heard them open the door, as neither of them were ever particularly quiet when they arrived. When I didn't hear anything, I tried to go back to my studying, but as soon as I did, I heard something again. I cocked my head and listened closely. What I heard caused me to go cold inside. In a distinct male voice, I heard counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I wasn't sure what to do. The voice was not the voice of either of my roommates. It was clearly a much older male voice, and it was a repetitive counting over and over again. My first thought that it had to be someone that broke into the house. My roommates would have told me if anybody else would have access to the house. So I cocked my head, though, to listen again, and what I heard was 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Not knowing what was going on, but certain that there must be an intruder in the house, I decided the best thing to do was to make it seem like I wasn't at home. Slowly, I closed the lid of my laptop and sat at my desk in darkness. Quietly, I got up and made my way over to my bed, which was against the wall of my roommate's bedroom, as I mentioned, and I quietly curled myself up against the wall. Listening through the wall, I heard 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Whatever was going on, there was definitely something other than me in that house. I couldn't assume that I knew why someone broke in, or if they even knew I was there. The only thing I could be sure about was that there was someone there, and if they didn't know that I was there, I had to keep myself as quiet as possible. So I curled up against the wall so I could listen in the other room and know that if for any reason that person would leave the room and go anywhere else, I'd hear it. Well, laying against the wall, the most terrifying thought of my entire life entered my mind. Well, undoubtedly somebody had broken into the house, and the fact that they were in the other room counting to 4 over and over again, it was evident that he was not mentally stable. For the first time in my entire life, I was completely aware of my mortality, and nothing could have convinced me that I was going to be okay. Well, as I lay there curled up against the wall, I had completely forgotten about my laptop sitting on the desk. Although I had closed the lid, I didn't turn the volume down, and my laptop was not set to go to sleep. So a different friend at that moment sent a message, and the notification loudly echoed in my room. I grimaced, wondering if it was possible that the person in the other room had heard it. I put my head back to the wall to see if the person was still counting. At first I didn't hear anything. Then I began to get up and try to make my way quietly to the computer, and at that moment I heard it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I relaxed, assuming the person hadn't heard me. Slowly I crept over to my laptop, lifted up the screen, muted it, and quietly made my way back to the wall. I wasn't sure how long I stayed there, in my room, listening to that psychopath in the other room counting over and over. After a period of time, curled up on my bed, I heard the front door of the house open. Someone came in and was rummaging through the house. Well, after hearing this new person open and close the door, I assumed it was my roommate because they weren't very quiet. Right after I made that assumption, I heard the voice of my male roommate, who must have come in, call out to me. Feeling safe, I got up and ran out of the room. My roommate was standing in his doorway, looking in at his bedroom. The window was open, and the screen had been taken out. All of the drawers were open, and items were thrown all over the place. It was obvious that we had been robbed. Looking at this video, playing in a continuous loop on the computer, a guy was working out, and he was counting 1, 2, 3, 4, over and over again. Well, we called the police, and this is one of the rare stories where the guy actually got caught. He was robbing another house a few days later, and he wasn't as fortunate in his attempt to get away that time. He had some of my roommate's belongings on him, so he confessed to the robbery. When asked about the exercise video, he said that he had heard somebody in the house getting something out of the kitchen. He had started the video to lure me into the room to see what was up. The video was meant to lure me in and distract me. When I never came in the room, he was about to make his way over to my room, and that's when he heard my roommate's car pull up, and he fled. He didn't say why he wanted to distract me, but he was found with a small hatchet on him when he was arrested. The Lonely Dorm. During my junior year at Northern Illinois University, due to my good grades getting me scholarships, I was able to afford to have my own room in the dorms. I was in the honors dorm in Douglas Hall, a building that has since been demolished. My room was on the third floor in the third of the four wings of the building. It was actually my first dorm room, as I had attended community college for the first 2 years. It was strange getting used to living such a life, but any college students who live in the dorms know what I mean. Living at NIU was nearly like living in a small self-contained city, with a student enrollment of over 26,000 and a campus of nearly 1,000 acres. It was a huge and continuously bustling community. The campus rarely quieted down. Students were up all night, partying or studying, socializing. Although the honors dorm had a mandatory quiet time, it was also right next to the football stadium, which made studying during games rather impossible. If I got up in the middle of the night to go for a walk, it was rare that I wouldn't run into anybody. There were generally always students everywhere. Now, the reason I bring this up is contrast, but I'll get to that in a moment. Living in DeKalb, Illinois, I was much farther from my parents' house than I'd ever been before. My scholarships paid for my room, but they didn't pay for gas money, and I could only afford one trip back home during the fall semester. I had to choose whether this would be during Thanksgiving or Christmas, and I eventually decided on Thanksgiving. So, for the 5-week winter break, I would be staying in my dorm room. Had I known what the campus was like during winter break, I likely would not have made this choice. By Friday of the last day of class, practically the entire campus had become deserted. It would be no exaggeration to assume there were likely less than 5 people left in all 4 wings of my dormitory. I was also the only person on the floor in my wing. Adding to that feeling of isolation was the heavy snowfall that we got that year. The first week by myself in that huge building was fine. I'd occasionally venture out to the liquor store to get a bottle of wine, and I'd occasionally run into 1 or 2 other students who were also sticking around during break. After that first week, though, things began to resemble the movie The Shining. I was staying in a big building, all by myself. Never saw anybody, except when I went to the liquor store, and that would just be the cashier. I stopped shaving, because nobody would see me. And about 2 weeks into vacation, when I looked into the mirror, I could have sworn I saw Jack Torrance looking back at me. It's weird what your mind can do to you when you spend all your time not only alone, but in such a large, frozen, and isolated area. Without classes, my days lost all structure. I stayed up as late as I wanted. I slept as late as I wanted. It didn't matter. It was way too cold to go outside for much anyway, other than my liquor store trips. I began talking to myself, but not in a crazy way. I just wanted to hear a voice, or sometimes just to actually speak. Although I'm normally not very apprehensive, walking around in the dorm was getting a bit unnerving to me. All the lights in the hallways had been turned off during the break, so as I walked from my room to the bathrooms, the only light I had to go by were from the little water closets and from the bathrooms themselves. I would start to see things in the shadows, but I was able to convince myself it was all just imagination. After I had been in the dorm by myself for about 3 weeks, I was up one night watching television in my room. It was about 2 a.m., and I was watching the game show network in the dark. Suddenly, there was a knock at my door. Startled, I barely moved. I had no idea why somebody would be knocking on my door, not only in an empty building, but also at 2 o'clock in the morning. I thought it must have been the campus police. When the knock came again, I got up and looked through the peephole. What I saw was definitely not a campus police officer, nor did it look like a student. I was a bit older than most of the other students, but the guy outside my door was definitely in his 40s. He stood there looking at the door and then knocked again. Well, I wasn't about to answer the door to someone I didn't know and had no idea why or even how he was in the building, so I ignored the knocking. Eventually, the knocker left. It was possible that the knocker never knew I was even in there, as the door was very thick, and I watched TV with captions. So I tried not to think about it. That is, until the next night, when I was again sitting in bed, and again watching the game show network. This time I had been drinking a bottle of Riesling, and wondering why Richard Karn was ever chosen to host the Family Feud, when it happened again. I froze, not really knowing what to think. I hadn't forgotten about the previous night's encounter, but I had dismissed it as not being important. Quietly, I got up and made my way over to the door. Looking through the peephole, I saw it was the same man as before. He was looking down and knocking on the door. This time I was a bit frightened. I obviously didn't think the man could get into my room. The door was solid and very thick, as dorm rooms' doors tend to be. But I didn't know who the man was. I didn't know not only how he got into the building, which required a key card, but how he got onto my floor, which required a completely separate key. This time the man looked up at the peephole, smiled, and told me, "I can get in whenever I want." Then he turned around and left. I didn't know what to make of what was going on, but if anything, I decided not to open my door for any reason. This, however, was impossible, as I did not have a bathroom in my room. I waited for several hours before I couldn't hold it anymore, and I had to go pee. By that time it was 4:30 a.m., still pitch dark because it was the end of December, and I decided the man had been gone long enough for me to venture out of my room. I quietly left my room and locked the door behind me. I slipped the key into the pocket of my shorts. Then I slowly walked down the hallway to the bathroom, trying to be as acutely aware of my surroundings as possible. As usual, I seemed to be. Deftly, I made it to the bathroom and decided to use a stall instead of a urinal. I figured the privacy would be much more appreciated at this point. So I just tried to relax so I could use the bathroom. The entire time I was in the stall, I heard all sorts of sounds in the bathroom around me. I heard footsteps in the hallway. I heard people talking. All of it, though, I hoped, was just the paranoia from the isolation I had been under. You'd be surprised what your mind can convince you of when you've been alone for a long time. After I was done peeing, I was too scared to flush the toilet. Not just because it would draw attention to me, but if it did draw attention to me, it was so loud, the flushing would drown out any real noises. I promised myself that I would come back when the sun came up and convinced myself it didn't matter anyway, since I was the only person in that floor, and really the only person who had access to that bathroom. Slowly and somewhat apprehensively, I made my way back to my room. Quite inconveniently, my room was all the way at the end of the hallway, but conveniently, right across the hall from one of those water closet rooms that were always lit up, so there was a light right outside my door. I walked slowly over to my room, not hearing any noises, and it was very, very quiet. As I got back to my door, I darted my eyes around, looked inside the water closet, and there was nobody anywhere. So I took my key out of my pocket and put it into the lock slowly, turned it, and opened the door. As I pushed the door open, the light from the water room behind me flipped off. I didn't even turn around to look and see who it was. I opened the door, rushed into my room, and slammed the door shut and locked it quickly behind me. After a moment, I turned around and looked through the peephole. The man who had been knocking on my door was standing outside my door. He was looking at the peephole, and he said again, "I can get in whenever I want." He smiled at me, turned around, and left. I knew I needed to call the campus police, but I tried to catch my breath first. The man would be long gone before the police got there anyway, and if he had to come in and out through the lobby, there were cameras there that would have caught him on film. I was completely safe in my room, and I knew, despite the man's claims, he would not be able to get into my room in any way. When I finally got a hold of myself, I walked over to my desk and lifted the lid of my laptop computer. I was looking for the directory so I could call the police. As I opened my laptop up, my entire body went numb as I saw a piece of paper taped to my laptop screen that simply read, "Whenever I want." The Stuffed Bear. This story is really more creepy than it is scary. When I was a child, for my 5th Christmas or so, my family bought me a teddy bear. God, I love that bear. It was a brown and cuddly plush toy that I took with me wherever I went. When I started kindergarten, the bear went with me. I, of course, couldn't take it to school as I got older, but I did start keeping it on a special place on my bed. I never slept a night without it. As I got older, I didn't tend to hug it all night, but I still remained on my bed, on its own pillow, facing the door, waiting to welcome me as I got home from school. I took good care of that bear and absolutely loved it to death. My family is from Minnesota, and not particularly well off money-wise. We were always able to have all the things we really needed, and some of the things that we wanted, but we didn't get to travel very much. I always wanted to get out of Minnesota. I knew that going to college out of state was going to be heavily reliant on myself being able to get scholarships. Although I could go to a state school in Minnesota and pay for it with loans and grants, I had my hopes set on going to UC Berkeley, and not being a California resident, that was only going to happen a lot of hard work. I studied extra hard in high school. I didn't spend too much time partying or even hanging out with friends. I used my summer hours to study for my ACT test, and I worked my butt off to get the best GPA possible. Come high school graduation, my hard work paid off. I graduated second in my class, and I got my scholarship to Berkeley. When the time came for me to leave to California, most of my items were shipped ahead. I had to get everything I thought I would need to last me until Christmas, as my family could not afford a Thanksgiving visit. While most of my items were shipped ahead, I did take a few of them on the bus with me. My beloved bear was in a duffel bag that would accompany me on the Greyhound bus that would take me to school. When I arrived at the station in California, I was distressed when I found out that my duffel bag was not in the luggage hold. I immediately called my dad, and he had to file a lost luggage complaint with the bus company. Fortunately, since I had shipped the majority of my stuff ahead, I had all the things that I really needed in my dorm room. I wasn't in that bad of a jam. The only problem was my bear was in that duffel bag. While the clothes were replaceable, the bear was not. Well, although I was distressed at the loss of the bear, it didn't completely ruin my arrival at school. As is the case with most freshmen, I was too swept up in school activities and my new classes to spend too much time pining. But even though I went through the college motions, even as I worked hard at my new life, my mind never strayed from the fact that I really missed my bear. After class, when I go into my dorm room, I always expected to see the bear sitting on a pillow facing the door, welcoming me home, but it never did. Well, good news came to me around the Thanksgiving holiday. Greyhound had finally located the duffel bag and gotten it back to my parents' house. I was delighted when I heard about it. My father offered to send the bear to me through the mail, but I was not going to take the chance of losing it again. I declined. I told him I would feel safer if he put it on the pillow so it could welcome me when I got home. When I went back to school after Christmas, I would carry it with me on the bus. When the finals and the semester were over, I got my bus ticket back to Minnesota. I was on cloud 9 for many reasons. I knew I was going to have straight A's in my first semester. I was going to get to see my family for the first time in 4 months. And I would be finally reunited with my bear. It would be welcome me home for the first time in 4 months. There was no way I would ever let that bear out of my sight again. When I got home, I hugged my mom and dad and even my younger brother. We exchanged some pleasantries, but I was eager to get to see my bear. I had been away from it for longer than I'd ever been in my life, and I was not going to feel like I was home until it welcomed me home. I was just way too excited to see it. So, when the opportunity came, I went in my bedroom and saw my bear sitting on my pillow, where my father left it, facing the door, and welcomed me home. I stopped rather than rushing over to my bed, though. I was a bit taken aback by the appearance of the bear. It was in fine shape, but there was something different about it. When I flipped the lights on in the bedroom, its eyes started sparkling red. I stopped for a moment before approaching it. When I did, I moved it out of the light, and although they weren't sparkling anymore, the eyes were definitely red. I didn't think the eyes on that bear were ever red. Feeling a bit out of sorts, I left the bear and went back to visit with my family. Try as I might, I couldn't get my mind off the eyes of the bear, though. When my dad asked me why I seemed distracted, I finally asked him, was that really my bear, or did he purchase a similar one to make me happy? He seemed very surprised that I would ask such a question. I explained the issue about the eyes and that I'd never noticed they were red. He assured me that it was my bear, and I probably just never saw the light shining into the eyes of the bear before. He told me if the eyes were red now, they always had been. I wasn't sure about it, though. My whole evening was weird. My reunion with my bear made me very uneasy. When bedtime came, I was very nervous. Rather than hugging the bear as usual, I took it and set it on a chair across from the room, with its facing the other way. I left it that way for the remainder of my vacation. When the time came for me to go back to school, I tried leaving the bear in my room. For some reason, my beloved animal had become an object of apprehension. My father, however, noticed the bear in the room and brought it to me, telling me how upset I would be if I forgot it again. Therefore, I held it in my lap on the bus ride back to school. Once I got back to my dorm room, I was unsure of what I wanted to do with the bear. It still meant the world to me, but the red eyes made me nervous. It made it feel as if it wasn't my bear. Equally, though, I didn't feel like I should get rid of it, because it had to be my bear. So I just left it sitting on my desk. The light in my dorm room wasn't very bright, so I didn't see the eyes sparkle red all the time, but I still saw them every time I looked at it. Even in the dark, when I couldn't see the bear, I knew its eyes were red. Well, I've kept the bear with me to this day. It does still frighten me a bit, but it's still my bear. I'm constantly stuck between feeling like I should get rid of it or keep it. I could just swear I've never seen those red eyes before I got home for that Christmas break. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you're interested in hearing more of them as they come up, please hit the subscribe button to be notified. My next video will be the pleas of a little boy who believes something is under his bed, even if his parents don't believe him. And remember, no matter how quiet it is, no matter how dark it is, no matter how much you want to believe it is true or not true, someone can always be watching you, and you're never truly alone.